Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Joe Meade is with me. We've got another college football playoff recap. This time, we're going to the Rose Bowl. Ohio State against Oregon, a rematch from that great game in October at the Autzen Stadium. And Joe, this one was the opposite result. Ohio State avenges their earlier season loss with ended up being a 41-21 victory. But Joe, this one was over quick. Ohio State with another fast start, exactly what we asked from them. It was 31-0 with 8 minutes left in the second quarter. Ohio State started this game off fast. Oregon did not know what hit them, and 20 minutes into this one, it was over.
God, the final score is a massive understatement of how this game really was. The game was over, like you said, wait, 8 minutes in the second quarter. I thought it was over on the third play. I'm not even joking. The way Ohio State moved down the field, and I know I'm the resident scumbag Wolverine to a lot of you Ohio State listeners, but I'm complimenting you and your past team saying this. The way they did that was reminiscent of how Ohio State would move the ball in Michigan in 2018 and 2019. How Oregon game planned this game is nothing short of a travesty on their part.
Especially being they beat them already once.
Absolutely. And they played great against them with
Yeah.
mistakes and won. And to come out, get tricked by a G. Scott misdirection play, and then 2 plays later have Jeremiah Smith go untouched into the end zone. The guy who's probably the best player on the field at that moment, outside of maybe an Oregon defender that one Duck fan might argue is better. I don't know what the heck the defense was doing. I'll be really honest. For all the hype Oregon's gotten this year, and they've deserved it. They've done a lot of good things. This is probably one of the most embarrassing, and I'm not here to sugarcoat, the most embarrassing performance by a 1 seed in the playoff era, uh, 4 team and 12 team. A lot of people might point to Clemson 2017 losing 24-6. That game was competitive through 3 quarters. This game was competitive for a total of the kickoff. The kickoff was competitive. Other than that, Oregon's offense, I don't know what Will Stein did. Run, run, pass. Are you serious? That's your solution to win a firefight with Ohio State? Because we said, Sean, if Ohio State jumps early, it's going to be a firefight, and you have to maintain the track meet until you can kind of get it to the more ground and pound, which is
They
what
never
I thought
even had
Oregon
it
could be
in the
suited to
first
do.
place. I
Nope.
did I did think this would be a blow for blow shootout. It wasn't that. Oregon tried to ease their way into this game, establish the run, which is they've never done that this year, and it seemed like, Joe, that they weren't ready to play. Now, we're not going to judge their preparation from our chairs here and on this computer, but when you get totally punched in the mouth right like that, it's truly shocking to believe that they thought that there was a game, like they didn't know there was a game today. And the amount of man coverage that we saw Oregon put into Ohio State, I mean, that is just what they feasted on all year. Jeremiah Smith, 7 for 187 and 2 touchdowns. I mean, you got to put somebody else over there. It seemed like pretty basic stuff. It seemed like Ohio State was way more talented, and everybody loves to talk about the Ohio State's $20 million roster, Joe. There are reports out there that Oregon might have a more expensive one.
Not only
And
do they have a more expensive roster, Sean, I hate to say this because I'm not trying to upstage Ohio State's receivers because they're phenomenal as proven. Oregon's top three, a lot of people ranked over Ohio State's top three receivers, just for context too. And arguably not even arguably, Ferguson's a far better tight end than G. Scott. I don't think that's a controversial statement.
and it wasn't competitive, and that just really can't happen from Oregon. They ended up
No.
establishing into the game, and they end up scoring 3 touchdowns, but Ohio State took the foot off the gas because this thing was over. Travion Henderson had his 66-yard touchdown where it looked like it was a walk-through practice play. I mean, nobody was even close to him. And then you had Keyshawn Judkins obviously putting a lot, of when they were chewing the clock. He did a lot of work there. Will Howard, 319 yards passing on just 17 completions. The fact that Ohio State won wasn't exactly surprising. I think we both predicted them to, but for Oregon to have such a great year all year and then to lay a total egg like this, Questions will be asked about them, and unfortunately, this is the game that their season's going to be remembered upon.
1,000%, Sean. And one thing I want to highlight is Oregon's offensive line the entire year. I mean, I think they were nominated for the Joe Moore Award. I think you got to throw that award in the trash, even if they did end up winning it, which they're not going to. 8 sacks.
Yeah.
8 sacks. Jack Sawyer, for all the people who made fun of him, and certainly I'm guilty of it, he had a phenomenal game. 2 sacks. Cody Simon, 2 sacks. JT Tuimoloau, 2 sacks. I mean, this is what probably Ohio State when they ended up getting Tuimoloau, Sawyer, and all those 5 stars in the class of 21, which is one of the best recruiting classes ever. And most of them are still there, to be very fair. This is probably what they envisioned would happen, albeit it took longer than 4 years to happen. They're finally seeing the byproduct of it right now. And in terms of playoff performance, Sean, this is definitely the most impressive performance I've seen in the playoffs so far.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I can't think of anything that would really rival it, to be quite honest with you.
And we will do another video previewing the next round, Joe, but Texas has got to be going into that game, seeing how great Ohio State started these two playoff games, and they might just be in the camp of like get to halftime with the game within one score because both of those games were over really quickly. And we talked about Ohio State all year had a starting problem. I mean, they were losing after the first quarter and probably more than half their games. They were losing at Northwestern, against Indiana, against Nebraska. Like, they completely turned that around. They were losing every game early, and they flipped the switch after the slow start finally cost them against Michigan. And now they've completely turned that around. Ryan Day and his coaching staff does deserve credit. Chip Kelly as well. They made a ton of play calling mistakes against Michigan, and it seems like for now, Joe, they have learned from those. And at this point, it's hard to see somebody, any team really, making a game with Ohio State. But obviously, we're going to criticize Oregon's coaching staff in a little bit, but you got to be praising Ryan Day and his staff.
No, 1,000,000% shot. I think everything Chip Kelly wanted Oregon to do, he made them do. And that's certainly the fault of Oregon, but it's also to the praise of Chip Kelly. And I think Jim Knowles, the reason I don't praise him as much is because he's been phenomenal the entire year. I think the first Oregon game was his sole bad half. I don't think it was a bad game. And the Michigan game, they held him to 13 points. I don't really know what you want him to do. You hold any team to 13 points with that offense, you should be able to win by a lot. So Jim Knowles throughout his tenure has been great. I know they'll point to the few losses they've had and completely obliterate him, but I do think that between Knowles and Kelly, that tandem, and those are guys that could very well be head coaches right now. Knowles has been a coordinator forever, and Chip Kelly obviously has been a head coach both in college and the NFL. Those are guys that are probably Ohio State has 3 head coaches in my book. They have Ryan Day kind of, CEOing the ship. But then on offense and defense, they have experts in both regards that have been through it. Chip Kelly first year at Ohio State, but this is Knowles' third year at Ohio State. He knows exactly his personnel. They all know the scheme. They know what he wants, and he knows what he has in his players. So I think with Caleb Downs patrolling the field too, it's going to be really hard to hit a big play on this defense going forward, whether that's Texas, Penn State, or Notre Dame.
Yeah, and it they had a golden opportunity to play another game after the Michigan disaster. In no other year would they have had a chance. They would have been playing, in a bowl game, and it wouldn't really be meaningful. But they got that extra opportunity, and at least for now, they've taken it. Now, Joe, we talk about what the thought of the season is. That'll be an off-season episode, but we're starting to get into the territory where Ohio State could make this a memorable season, despite losing to Michigan, despite not winning the Big Ten. And at least at this point, you have to think that they are the favorites to win 2 more.
Not only do I think that, I think Vegas thinks that, and ultimately, Sean, this is someone who grew up in the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. I think it's the most important thing in the world to win that game. This is uncharted territories if they do win it all. How will that truly be judged? I think a lot of people can make an assessment, whether they're a Michigan fan, Ohio State fan, or a casual fan, from the outside. But until it's done, I'm quite fascinated to see if that happens, what the reaction would be. But Sean, Ohio State has the chance to be probably the most volatile team in history. They went from the most loved team to the most hated team for like a month, and now they're the most loved team again. So certainly not gonna count horses for that. I think their fans know that they've been in this position before where they've been favored, particularly the Clemson 2019 game. They know what's at stake, and they know to not uh, necessarily get ahead of themselves, particularly against the Texas team, which probably has as much talent as Ohio State's.
And Joe, we as much as we should praise Ryan Day and Ohio State's coaching staff, I think we do need to criticize Dan Lanning in Oregon. There is a narrative that is starting to form around the Ducks. They lose both games to Washington last year, their biggest games. While they did obviously win a Big Ten championship this year, this is a quarterfinal loss. They didn't even get to the Final Four. So, is Dan Lanning, obviously nowhere near James Franklin territory yet, but it certainly is pointed in that direction.
Sean, I'll put it to you this way. For a team that won the Big Ten and had an undefeated regular season, take away the game itself. You would kind of guess they'd at least make the four, and they didn't. Now, you could talk to me all you want about scheduling, and
They
I do
did get
think
really, it's really unfortunate they had to play Ohio State.
so do I. But if you're going to tell me this is a national championship winning team, you play who you play, and if
You
you want to
lose
win the
by a
national
field goal
title,
to Ohio State. You don't
yeah.
lose by 20
And if you
plus.
want to win the national title, you got to beat the big dogs. And Ohio State proved they're a lot bigger dog than you guys are. And one thing I'll say with all the antics, calling timeout at the big house to see the fans leaving who are leaving anyway. Not really rubbing it in, but kind of flexing that, flexing beating a 4-8 Colorado team, flexing, winning the Liberty Bowl. I mean, winning the Fiesta Bowl against Liberty. And I do think Dan Lanning's a heck of a coach, but I do think he has to ease back on some of those antics a bit because it kind of made them vulnerable. And if you think Ohio State wasn't using that as bulletin board material, you're sorely mistaken. I'm not going to minimize their win over Ohio State earlier in the year because that did lead them to win the Big Ten title. I will say they were pretty fortunate in that game, which I called at the time, getting that OPI on Jeremiah Smith and that 12-man, which, by the way, was great, and having Will Howard make a terrible decision at the end of the game. So Oregon, the problem is this narrative is going to be there forever, whether it was Chip Kelly, Helfrich, to Taggart the 1 year, to Cristobal, to now Lanning. Oregon can't win the big one, unfortunately. And they're a premier program. I'm not saying anything about them, but they've been in BCS national title games. They've been in playoff national title games. They've been on the verge of going to the four teams several times. And they've lost a critical game, whether it was the Pac-12 title game, whether it was a silly regular season game, or whether and losing to Oregon State a few times. Half the reason Jonathan Smith has the Michigan State job is because he beat Oregon a lot. So I really don't know. I think this is a prevailing theory that's been happening long before Dan Lanning, and it's going to be on him to snap it because he's gotten damn close. But, this Ohio State game shows, in spite of how close they've been to being a national champion, in terms of the bracket itself, they're still as far away as they've ever been.
And you still got to win. And you can't just get lucky once or twice anymore. You got to win at least 3, potentially 4 games to win it all. Joe, the thing is that they're in the Big Ten now, so there's plenty of opportunities for big games in the upcoming years. He'll have his chances to get over the hump, and I guess only time will tell to see if they can kind of snuff out this prevailing theory before it gets to uncontrollable territory like their neighbors that they played in the Big Ten Championship. But, Joe, that is all we have for you today. Please be sure to check out our other videos. We've got previews coming up for the semifinals. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.